I never thought I would see the day when the man I looked up to all my life, the one whose voice I could always hear cheering me on in the back of my mind, would turn his back on me in such a cruel, deliberate way. My wedding day was supposed to be the culmination of years of love, patience, and careful planning, not just in terms of choosing the right partner, but in trying to heal old family wounds so everyone could come together in one room without drama. I had always imagined my father walking me down the aisle, his arm steady beneath my hand, his proud smile showing the world that I was still his little girl, even though I was starting a new chapter of my life. But instead of that image, what I got was the sound of his voice over the phone, cold and detached, telling me that he couldn't be there for me because my sister had organized something important on the same day. I didn't need to ask what it was. I knew she had arranged some kind of party, something she would make sure was loud, dramatic, and impossible for him to miss, because she knew exactly how to push every button and pull every string in our family. My sister had hated me for as long as I could remember. I had spent years trying to figure out why. Was it jealousy, some grudge she held on to from childhood, or just a deep-seated desire to see me miserable? It didn't matter in the end, because whatever the root was, she had nurtured it like a poisonous plant, watering it with every opportunity she had to humiliate me. The irony was, we hadn't even spoken much over the last year. She kept her distance unless there was an opening to ruin something for me. And when I told my family about my wedding date, I could almost hear her smirk over the phone when she said, "Oh, that's nice." I should have known she was already planning her sabotage. My father's loyalty to her had always baffled me. He would excuse her behavior by saying, "She's going through a lot," or "You know how she is," as though being cruel was some chronic condition she couldn't help but inflict on others. Over the years, that defense chipped away at my trust in him, but I still believed that when it came down to something as important as my wedding, he would choose to be there for me. I had chosen a beautiful old garden venue for the ceremony, with arching trees that would frame the path I'd walk down, their leaves catching the sunlight in a way that made the whole place feel magical. I'd picked that setting because I'd always pictured my father and I taking those slow steps together while everyone watched. A rare moment where the distance that had grown between us would close, even just for a few minutes. But when he called to say he wouldn't make it, the ground fell out from under me. He didn't even sound apologetic. It was more like he wanted me to understand that I was the one being unreasonable, that he had to attend my sister's event, because she really needs me right now. He never explained what the party was for, and I didn't bother asking. I could already see the smug look on her face, could hear the way she'd gloat afterward, telling anyone who would listen that she had pulled it off, that even on my wedding day, she could take center stage and leave me standing alone. My fiancé David tried to calm me down when he found me pacing the kitchen with my phone still in my hand. He told me we could have his uncle walk me down the aisle, or that I could walk alone like some independent symbol of strength. But I didn't want a symbol. I wanted my father. I wanted the tradition, the memory, the reassurance that he was proud of me. And the fact that I couldn't have it wasn't just a disappointment, it was a wound that cut deeper the more I thought about it. I stayed up that night scrolling through old photos of us, trying to reconcile the man and them, laughing with me, holding my hand on my first day of school, sitting beside me at piano recitals, with the one who had so casually decided to skip one of the most important days of my life. I told myself I wouldn't cry over it anymore, that I wouldn't give my sister the satisfaction of knowing she had hurt me this badly. But every time I imagined standing at the start of that aisle, looking for him, and realizing he wasn't there, the tears came anyway, hot and relentless. And somewhere deep down, a seed of anger started to grow, not just toward my sister, but toward him, because no matter how manipulative she had been, it was his choice to let her win. The morning after that call, I woke up with the kind of heavy feeling in my chest that usually follows a nightmare. Except this wasn't one I could shake off by telling myself it wasn't real. It was happening, and I had to face it. My phone buzzed with messages from my bridesmaids asking about final fittings and floral arrangements, and while I typed polite replies, my mind was elsewhere, stuck in that loop of hearing my father's voice, choosing her over me. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself maybe he thought he could attend both events somehow, maybe he didn't understand how much it mattered to me. But then I remembered the tone in his voice, that flat certainty that told me he'd already made up his mind. I'd seen that same tone before, when he defended her after she spread rumors about me in high school. when she stole money from my purse and he told me not to make a scene, when she refused to attend my college graduation and he shrugged, as though it were nothing. It had always been easier for him to pacify her than to stand up for me. And now, on the threshold of my marriage, he was proving that some things never change. I wanted to call him back, to scream, to ask him if he understood that by not being there, he was making a public statement about where his loyalties lay. But the truth was, I already knew the answer, and it would hurt more to hear it again. Instead, I went through the motions of wedding prep with a smile that felt like it might crack my face. I checked the seating chart, sent the final payment to the caterer, and confirmed the arrival time for the string quartet. On the outside, it probably looked like I was handling things fine, but inside, every detail felt like a reminder that he wouldn't see it. He wouldn't see the lace veil my mother's mother had worn, which I had painstakingly restored. He wouldn't hear the vows I'd written, ones I'd once imagined practicing with him so he could tell me if my voice sounded steady, and he wouldn't be there to share that quiet moment before the ceremony, where a father usually whispers something like, "I'm proud of you," or "You're going to be so happy." Instead, I imagined him sitting at my sister's party, maybe laughing, maybe toasting her, completely unfazed by the fact that he'd abandoned me on what should have been one of the happiest days of my life. The bitterness of it started to seep into everything I did. When my maid of honor, Chloe, came over to help with decorations, she noticed it right away. "You're quieter than usual," she said, handing me a spool of ribbon. I told her the truth, expecting sympathy, but instead I saw her eyes harden in that way they do when she's ready to fight for me. "You know this isn't about you not being worth it," she said firmly. "It's about him not having the spine to tell her no. That's on him." I nodded, but it didn't make it hurt less. In the evenings, David and I would sit at the kitchen table going over last-minute plans, and he kept trying to make me laugh, telling me about ridiculous things his groomsmen were doing, or how his cousin had offered to be our emergency aisle escort if I needed one. I appreciated the effort, but the shadow of my father's absence hung over everything. The closer we got to the wedding, the more I wondered if it would overshadow the day itself. I started having these flashes in my mind, the music starting, everyone standing, me taking that first step, and instead of feeling joy, I felt this hollow ache, as though I'd be performing in a play where one of the main characters was missing. It wasn't just about walking down the aisle. It was about the symbolism of it, about knowing that the man who had raised me cared enough to stand by me in front of everyone. Without that, I feared it would always feel incomplete. I told myself to focus on the people who would be there, the ones who loved me enough to show up no matter what. But the thought of my sister winning, of her grinning to herself at that party, knowing she'd managed to keep him from me, was like a stone in my stomach. I could almost hear her voice, dripping with mock innocence, saying, "Oh, I didn't know it was such a big deal," while secretly savoring every ounce of the damage she'd caused. And worse, I could picture my father believing her, comforting her, maybe even thinking he'd done the right thing. That image made me want to scream into a pillow until my throat hurt. But instead I sat there, tying bows for the table centerpieces, as if everything were fine. The truth was, I didn't know how I was going to walk down that aisle without feeling like I was missing a piece of myself. The days leading up to the wedding became a blur of forced smiles and silent battles inside my head, the kind that no one else could see but that I felt in every shallow breath and tight muscle in my shoulders. I told myself that I wouldn't let my father's absence or my sister's petty cruelty ruin what David and I had built, but every quiet moment was like an invitation for those thoughts to creep back in. The more I tried to suppress them, the louder they seemed to get. I would wake up in the middle of the night, not from nightmares, but from the echo of that short, sharp conversation with my father, his voice firm, almost impatient, as if I were the unreasonable one for expecting him to be at my side. I kept replaying all the little moments in my life when I'd made excuses for him, when I'd told myself that he did love me, just in his own way, that maybe he didn't know how to express it, but the reality was beginning to feel much simpler and much more painful. Maybe he just didn't care enough to fight for me when it counted. My sister, on the other hand, was thriving in her role as the villain in this story. I didn't even need to talk to her to know it. She had always been clever in her cruelty, dressing it up as coincidence or miscommunication, but her timing was always surgical, precise. like she had a calendar marked with the exact dates she could inflict the maximum amount of damage. In some twisted way, she probably enjoyed the fact that she didn't have to be at my wedding to still cast her shadow over it. She could sit at her party surrounded by whatever circle of friends or sycophants she'd gathered, sipping wine, laughing too loudly, and imagining me standing there without my father, feeling small. That's who she was, someone who could feed off the misery of others, especially mine. And my father, whether through weakness or willful blindness, was handing her exactly what she wanted. David kept telling me that this was still our day, that the people who mattered most would be there, that in time, I'd look back and remember the joy more than the hurt. I wanted to believe him, but I also knew myself. I knew that when I looked at the wedding photos in the years to come, I'd always see the empty space where my father should have been. I'd see the way I forced my smile, the way my hand might be shaking just slightly as I held my bouquet. I'd know that behind the laughter at the reception and the glow of candlelight, there had been a part of me that was grieving, because that's what it felt like, grief. Not the kind that comes with losing someone entirely, but the kind that comes with realizing you've lost the version of someone you thought existed. I'd lost the father I believed would stand up for me when it mattered most. The hardest part was that I didn't even want to confront him anymore. What was the point? He'd made his choice, and arguing about it wouldn't change the fact that, on my wedding day, he'd be somewhere else by choice. Chloe offered to reach out to him, to try and talk some sense into him, but I told her not to bother. I couldn't handle the possibility of hearing a second-hand version of him doubling down on his decision. I didn't want to hear excuses or false apologies. I didn't want to give him another opportunity to hurt me before the big day. So I focused on what I could control: the dress fittings, the menu, the lighting for the ceremony. I buried myself in the details, as if perfecting those would somehow patch the hole his absence would leave. But late at night, when David was asleep beside me and the house was quiet, I'd lie there and think about the little girl I used to be, the one who ran to her father with every scraped knee, who saved her drawings to show him when he got home from work, who believed that he would always be her safe place. I wondered what she would think of me now, standing on the edge of a new life without him by my side. I wondered if she would feel the same mixture of sadness and fury, the same sense of betrayal. And in those moments, I realized that part of the hurt came from knowing I could never go back to seeing him the same way again. Even if he called tomorrow and said he'd changed his mind, that he'd be there to walk me down the aisle, I'd still remember that his first instinct was to say no, to choose her over me. That truth would sit between us forever, no matter how much I wanted to pretend otherwise. And the closer the wedding day came, the more I understood that I wasn't just preparing for a celebration. I was preparing for a reckoning with myself, for the moment I'd have to walk forward without the person I'd always imagined would be there. The morning of the wedding arrived like a tide. I couldn't stop, no matter how unprepared I felt. The first light of dawn slipped through the curtains, painting the room in a pale gold glow that should have felt magical, but instead it only made the knot in my stomach tighten. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the occasional sound of someone moving about downstairs, probably Chloe, already up and making sure everything was in place. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that I could push through the day without letting my father's absence consume me, but it was already there, heavy in my chest, like an unwelcome guest that had decided to stay. I forced myself out of bed, letting the cool air wash over my bare feet as I padded to the vanity where my dress hung. Still wrapped in its protective garment bag, I unzipped it slowly, running my fingers over the delicate lace and beadwork, the fabric smooth and cool under my fingertips. It was everything I had dreamed of, yet, as I stood there looking at it, I couldn't shake the image of him not being there to see me in it. The ache flared again, sharp and deep, but I pushed it down, telling myself that I wouldn't let my sister win by falling apart. Downstairs, the energy was different, buzzing, alive, full of chatter, as my bridesmaids flitted between the kitchen and the living room, their dresses draped carefully over hangers, their hair half-pinned, makeup scattered across the counters. Chloe spotted me first and crossed the room in 3 strides, wrapping me in a hug that I didn't know I needed until her arms were around me. "You look like you haven't slept," she murmured into my ear. I gave a small laugh that wasn't quite real. I didn't. She didn't ask why. She knew. The makeup artist arrived soon after, her presence a whirlwind of brushes, palettes, and cheerful small talk. I sat in the chair, letting her work her magic, nodding and smiling at the right moments. But my mind kept drifting to the ceremony. I imagined standing at the top of that aisle, everyone turning to look, and the seat beside my mother in the front row being empty, or worse, occupied by someone who was only there out of obligation, a stand-in for the man who should have been there. David had offered again to find someone else to walk with me, his uncle, his brother, even his best man, but every time I considered it, I felt like I'd be admitting defeat, like I'd be trying to fill a void that couldn't be filled. The only compromise I could think of was walking alone, owning it, telling myself it was a statement of independence rather than a symbol of abandonment. But even that thought came with its own sting, because I didn't want to have to make a statement. I wanted my father. As the morning wore on, the photographer arrived, her camera clicking softly as she captured the little details, the rings on the table, the flowers being tied with ribbon, the way the sunlight streamed through the window onto my dress. She asked me to hold the bouquet for a few shots, and as I did, I felt the weight of the day settle into my hands. The flowers were perfect, a burst of color and fragrance, but they felt heavy, almost symbolic of the weight I'd be carrying. Down that aisle, my mother popped in and out of the room, fussing over last-minute details, her own dress still on its hanger. She didn't say much about my father's absence, though I caught the look in her eyes once or twice, that mix of sympathy and something unspoken, maybe regret, maybe resignation. She'd lived through her own share of disappointments with him, and perhaps she understood better than anyone why this cut so deeply. At one point, I caught sight of my phone on the dresser, the screen lighting up with a new message. My heart gave a jolt before I even saw who it was from. For a split second, I let myself hope it was him, a last-minute change of heart, an apology, a promise to be there. But when I picked it up, it was a notification from social media, and there she was, my sister, posting a photo of her party, already in full swing, hours before my ceremony. She was dressed to kill, surrounded by people, champagne glasses raised high, the caption reading, "Celebrating with my favorite people in the world." I stared at it for a long moment, my grip tightening on the phone, until Chloe noticed and gently took it from me. "Don't give her that power," she said quietly. I swallowed hard, nodding, but the damage was done. The image was burned into my mind, a reminder that while I was here fighting to keep my composure, she was out there basking in the knowledge that she'd succeeded. By the time the car arrived to take us to the venue, I felt like I was running on autopilot, moving through the motions as though I were in someone else's wedding. The chatter around me blurred into background noise as I stared out the window, watching the city streets give way to the quiet beauty of the countryside. The closer we got, the more my pulse quickened, and when we finally pulled up to the garden, the sight of the archway draped in flowers and the rows of white chairs set my heart racing in a way that was equal parts joy and dread. I knew that in just a little while, I'd be stepping out there, every eye on me, and I would have to decide whether to let the absence beside me define the moment, or to take that walk on my own terms. No matter how much it hurt. When the time finally came, it felt like everything was moving both too fast and impossibly slow. The soft strains of the string quartet drifted through the air, mingling with the faint rustle of leaves overhead. Guests were taking their seats, a low hum of conversation and laughter filling the garden as the sun dipped lower, casting everything in a warm, golden light that should have felt like a blessing. Chloe squeezed my hand just before she stepped out to take her place, her smile warm but her eyes serious, silently telling me she believed I could do this. I stood just inside the entryway, hidden from view, my fingers clutching the bouquet, so tightly that I could feel the stems pressing into my palms. The coordinator leaned in and asked softly, "Ready?" And for a heartbeat, I wasn't sure I was. My legs felt heavy, my throat tight, and in that moment, all the air seemed to leave my lungs. I took a deep breath, willing my body to move forward, but before I could, I felt a wave of memories crash over me, the way I'd once imagined this moment with my father by my side. The steady rhythm of his footsteps matching mine, the way he'd look at me with pride. That vision was so vivid it hurt, like touching something sharp. And then I let it go. Or at least I tried. The music shifted, signaling my turn, and I stepped forward, my dress whispering against the ground as I moved into the light. The guests rose to their feet, and for a moment, I felt the heat of all those eyes on me, their smiles warm, some even teary. But in the very front, where I should have seen him, there was only that empty space. My mother sat there, her face soft but strained, her hands folded tightly in her lap. I looked straight ahead, fixing my gaze on David, who was standing under the arch, his expression a mix of love, awe, and something else, maybe understanding. My steps were steady, but inside, every nerve in my body felt raw. Each pace forward was both a victory and a reminder of what was missing. I could hear the crunch of gravel beneath my shoes, the faint sigh of the wind through the trees, and the beating of my own heart loud in my ears. Halfway down, I caught sight of one of my cousins, who gave me a little nod, almost like an unspoken message, "You've got this." I clung to that. I made it to the end of the aisle without stumbling, though my grip on the bouquet had left faint indentations in my skin. David reached for my hand, and when our fingers intertwined, I felt some of the tension in my chest ease. For the first time that day, I felt grounded. The officiant began speaking, his voice calm and warm, but I barely heard the words at first. My mind was still wrestling with the reality of the moment. I was here, I was doing this, and my father was not. I caught myself wondering what he was doing right then. Was he glancing at the clock? Was he thinking about me at all? Or was he too busy laughing at some joke my sister told, sipping champagne, enjoying his place at her table like nothing else in the world mattered? The thought made my jaw tighten, but I forced myself to focus on David. This was our moment, and I refused to let them take it entirely from me. The vows came next, and as I spoke mine, my voice only trembled once. I looked into David's eyes and meant every word, feeling the truth of them anchor me in the present. He said his, with the same steady sincerity that had made me fall in love with him in the first place, his voice unwavering, his gaze never leaving mine. When the officiant pronounced us married and David kissed me, the guests erupted into applause, the sound wrapping around us like a warm embrace. For a brief, shining moment, I let myself forget about the empty chair and the party happening somewhere else. I let myself believe that this was enough, that the people who were here, who had shown up for us, were what really mattered. And yet, even as we walked back up the aisle together, hand in hand, my heart carried the weight of that absence. It was a paradox I knew I'd have to live with, joy and hurt existing side by side, neither canceling the other out. The reception was waiting, filled with laughter and light, but somewhere deep inside, I knew that no matter how perfect everything else was, there would always be that small, silent corner of my heart reserved for the father who chose not to walk beside me. The reception was everything I had hoped it would be on the surface. Warm lights strung across the garden, tables adorned with lush centerpieces, the scent of roses and eucalyptus mingling with the aroma of the catered meal. Laughter rose in bursts from different corners of the tent, the clinking of glasses blending with the soft music playing in the background. Guests chatted animatedly, some lining up for drinks, others wandering toward the dessert table to sneak a piece of the cake before it was officially cut. From the outside, it looked like the perfect celebration, and in many ways, it was. David's family was out in full force, their energy infectious, their love for him extending easily toward me. My friends were radiant, their dresses catching the light, their joy in my happiness so genuine it almost made me forget the ache in my chest. Almost. But every time my eyes drifted toward the empty spot where my father should have been seated, the air seemed to thin just a little. I found myself glancing toward the entrance more than once, as if by some miracle he might appear, his face contrite, ready to make things right. But he didn't. Instead, during a quiet moment between courses, I slipped away to the edge of the venue where I could see the fading light over the horizon. I needed air, space, a moment to collect myself. That's when Chloe found me. She stepped up beside me without a word, following my gaze out to where the sky was painted in shades of pink and gold. After a moment, she said softly, "You did it, and you were incredible." I smiled faintly, but I could feel the tears threatening. "Again, it still hurts," I admitted, my voice catching. "I thought maybe once I was here, once it was happening, I could push it aside, but," I trailed off, shaking my head. She didn't try to feed me empty platitudes. Instead, she reached into her clutch and pulled out her phone. "I wasn't going to show you this tonight," she began, "but I think you should know." She turned the screen toward me, and there it was, another post from my sister. This time, it was a short video clip of my father at her party, laughing, his arm around her shoulders, raising a glass in some sort of toast. The caption read, "Surrounded by the best company tonight." I stared at it, my stomach twisting, my throat tightening. The sound was muted, but I could still see the ease in his body language, the way he leaned toward her like she was the only person who mattered. It was one thing to imagine it, it was another to see it. I handed the phone back, my hands trembling. Why would she even post that? I whispered, though I already knew the answer. Because she wants you to see it, Chloe said matter-of-factly. She wants to make sure you know she won. At least in her mind. The weight of it settled over me, heavier than before. But somewhere underneath the hurt, a spark of defiance flickered. I took a deep breath and turned back toward the reception. Then, I'm not giving her the satisfaction of ruining the rest of tonight, I said, though my voice was still unsteady. Chloe squeezed my arm. That's the spirit. Back inside, the speeches began. David's best man was first, delivering a heartfelt but hilarious recounting of their friendship. Then it was Chloe's turn, and she spoke with such love and conviction about the bond we shared that I felt my chest swell with gratitude. As she spoke, I realized that while my father wasn't there, I had people in my life who had chosen to stand beside me without hesitation. That choice mattered. When it came time for our first dance, David pulled me close, his hand firm at my waist, his smile soft and steady. The music wrapped around us, and for those few minutes, I let everything else fade away. The world narrowed to just the two of us, the way his eyes stayed locked on mine, the way his thumb traced gentle circles against my back. And when the song ended, and the guests cheered, I felt something inside me loosen, as if maybe I could carry this day forward, without letting it be defined entirely by what or who was missing. Still, as the night wore on and the dancing grew wilder, I couldn't help but think about what tomorrow would feel like, when the noise and the lights were gone, and I was left with the memories, both the beautiful and the bitter. I didn't know if I'd ever truly make peace with my father's choice, but I knew one thing: this was the start of my life with David, and I wouldn't let my sister's pettiness or my father's weakness be the headline of our story. The last of the guests began to trickle out under a sky now scattered with stars, their laughter fading into the night as car doors closed and engines hummed away. The garden was quieter now, though the lanterns still glowed softly, casting golden pools of light across the grass. I stood at the edge of the tent for a moment, my shoes dangling from my hand, feeling the cool earth beneath my bare feet. The music had shifted to something slower, softer, almost like the day itself was winding down in harmony with us. David was somewhere nearby, saying goodbye to his cousins. His jacket slung casually over one arm, his tie loosened just enough to reveal that the night had been a long one. I watched him laugh at something they said, the curve of his mouth familiar and grounding. That's when it really hit me. This day, for all its pain and complication, was ours now. My sister might have stolen my father's presence, but she hadn't stolen the marriage, the promises, the way David had looked at me as if there was no one else in the world. Still, I knew the ache wouldn't vanish overnight. It would sit in my chest for a while, a quiet companion to my joy, like a shadow that never fully disappears. Chloe came over, carrying 2 slices of cake wrapped carefully in napkins. "For you and the groom," she said, placing them in my hands. "And, in case I forget later, you were radiant today. Not just beautiful, but unstoppable." Her words settled into me like warm tea on a cold night. I hugged her tightly, whispering a thank you I hoped conveyed how much she had done for me. As David rejoined us, he slid his arm around my waist, pressing a soft kiss to my temple. "Ready to get out of here?" he asked, his voice low. "Meant just for me." I nodded, glancing once more at the venue, the flowers, the lights, the tables now being cleared by the staff. In my mind, I took a mental photograph, one that captured both the joy and the gaps, because this was the truth of the day. On the ride to the hotel, the silence between us was comfortable, filled with the kind of understanding that doesn't need words. I rested my head against the window, watching the blur of streetlights and thinking about the years ahead. There would be anniversaries, milestones, maybe children, and yes, there would also be family gatherings where my father's absence would be noticeable, holidays where my sister's smugness might still try to seep in. But I felt something shift, not a dramatic all-at-once healing, but a quiet acceptance that I couldn't control other people's choices, only my own. I thought about my mother, sitting alone in that front row without her husband beside her, and I realized she must have understood that truth long before I did. By the time we reached the hotel, my body was tired in that good, satisfying way that comes after a long, emotional day. David opened the door for me, and as we stepped into the softly lit lobby, I felt a strange sense of peace. This was the beginning, and beginnings are never perfect. They're messy, complicated, human. Upstairs, after we'd changed into more comfortable clothes, David handed me my slice of cake, and we ate it in bed, laughing at little moments from the day, swapping stories about guests we'd barely had time to talk to. And somewhere between bites, I realized I was smiling, not in spite of everything, but alongside it. The hurt was still there, yes, but it no longer had the power to eclipse the love and commitment that had filled the day. Lying there with him, the sound of the city faint through the window, I understood something I hadn't that morning. My father's refusal to walk me down the aisle said more about him than it did about me. My worth, my happiness, my future, none of those were diminished by his absence. They were mine to claim, and I had done exactly that. And as I drifted toward sleep, David's hand warm in mine, I made myself a quiet promise that this day, with all its imperfect beauty, would not be remembered for who wasn't there, but for everything and everyone that was.